Okay, people, this is an experiment. This could go really wrong. I haven't rehearsed the reading. It might change by the time I've finished doing the whole thing. Reading for 10 minutes, I'm going to make some mistakes, but let's see how we go. Hopefully it'll be a bit of fun. So, Freya and the Mages of Sin, reading number 1. This is going to take about 10 minutes. I'm hoping to read for only about 5 minutes at a time, but you've really got to get into the story a little bit before I want to stop for the first time. So, Freya and the Mages of Sin. Freya and her evil snake-headed mount Dinah were on the way to visit her good friend and sometime bedmate Hagar at his castle in Hyperbole when she got a message from the wizard Tagorli. It came in the form of a small grey dove which flew down to her as she rode south along the trade route from Seatown towards Hagar's kingdom. Freya, who'd been keeping a weather eye out for something to cook for her dinner, just managed to hold her hand steady on the bow when she realised that this small grey dove was no natural creature. It landed on Dinah's crest with a small thump and a soft flutter of featherless wings. Although the dove's harmless claws barely touched his flesh, Dinah reared high, taking offence at such a liberty being taken. He'd been bored anyway, and any excuse was better than none. He shook his long black mane and whirled up onto his hind toes. Though the woman aboard his back barely moved in the saddle, she still clouted him on the arse to stop his shenanigans, because the little dove was wavering on its precarious perch and looked inclined to disappear in a cloud of nothing, as she well knew it might do. "Still your feet, you quiching Egypt," she told Dinah, who shook his head again but came back to ground at her bidding. Not because he did what he was told very often, but because he was actually as interested as his rider in what had brought this unusual grey bird to rest there on his mane. He turned his head and rolled one smoky black eye to look back at it, and the bird, oblivious of its danger, wobbled on its perch and looked innocently and stupidly back. "Tig?" Freya asked into the sky, looking around hopefully, just in case the bird was merely a forerunner to the arrival of her magical comrade in person. But instead the dove shook out its featherless wings plumply and said, "Freya, my friend, I have need of your help. Will you come to me in the town of Fulcrum?" "At once," she said. And even as the little bird had flapped wildly and lifted away into the sky, she had turned Dinah's head west. As luck would have it, she was not so very far from Fulcrum as the crow flies or as the Dinah bulldozers, and she could be there in a week if she hurried. Hagar would have to wait. When she answered to Tagorli's call, Freya had been east and just south of the Green Forest, and she now rode west along its verdant borders as she and Dinah made fast time. In actual fact, Freya would have been one of the few who would have been safe to ride through that well-protected forest, as she had an understanding with the fierce people who lived there, but the trade route that ran around the forest made for a faster journey. What does that mad Keisha want me for now, she wondered as she rode, and with good reason. The wizard Tagorli was a particularly eccentric example of what was generally a pretty mad bunch of humans. It was also one of the most powerful, but prone to mistakes of sometimes catastrophic proportions. His heart was, however, in the right place, and Freya, who was loyal to only a few, would have come from a lot further away than this if he needed her. Dinah may not have won in the looks department, but his endurance and speed was second to none. They travelled 100 miles a day, stopping only for water, time to eat for dinner, and short naps for them both. Who knew but even this speed might prove to bring her to her friend too late? After some days of this sort of travel, neither of them looked their best when they cantered into the town of Fulcrum. Dinah's long mane and tail were full of pixie knots from the wind of his passage, and Freya's long blonde braids were felted and wild. They both had hollow cheeks and were black with trail dust. Both were, however, as fierce as ever, and so they looked as they swept past the guards at the gate and on, uninterrupted by officialdom. Freya was quite used to not being bothered. Tall and dressed in warlike fashion, smelling of rusty mail and sweat, she was yet still a beauty, with high cheekbones, bright blue eyes, legs that were long enough to wrap easily around a horse, or a man, and blonde hair that hung down past her arse when unbraided, but that rarely was. She looked about her with the confidence of knowing she could defeat pretty much any challenge, and it was no bluff. As usual in this town, everywhere were the soldiers of pleasure, sweating even in spring in their black armour with the poncy red feather headdresses. They kept the trade lines open down to pleasure, and they didn't stand for much mischief. It was a tame town compared to many, and Freya usually only stayed there long enough to transact any business she had. It was no fun to stay longer. Mixed with the soldiers, respectable-looking people eyed the scruffy pair with some judgment as they went down the main street, but Freya scowled at them, hand at the hilt of her well-blooded sword, grey-gory, and they looked away again quickly. There were more of these types than she remembered from her last time in the town. Then it had been largely traders, farmers, fishers and hunters, as dirty as she currently was. Something had happened to enrich this town. She wondered what. She didn't have to wonder where to find Tig, though. She rode straight to the Wolf's Den, the tavern where all the strangelings and lost ones were always welcome. Where else would that eccentric wizard stay? Leaving Dinner hitched to a ring in the wall of an alleyway behind the tavern that left him far enough away from both people and other horses, and hopefully, therefore, keeping them safe from his heels and teeth, she strode into the tavern's common room through the back door. It was a vast space, and even at midday it was already full. A long bar ran all along one side of it, and a great fire roared at both ends. Benches and big tables ran side to side from bar to far wall, and there were some smaller tables in the corners, ready for conspiracies of all kinds. All were currently full, though the benches were not so occupied. Loud voices filled the space, and the smell of beer and smoke. It was Freya's kind of place. Peros the Stout, tavern keeper extraordinary and well named, was at work behind his bar, and Freya nodded here and there to familiar faces as she swaggered up to lean on it and put a foot up on the rail, with a jingle and clunk of chainmail and boots. "Peros," she cried, "well met, denner of wolves and purveyor of rotgut." "My rotgut is the best in town, rider of fjords," he rejoined mildly. He never had to raise his voice, this man. He was huge, big as well as fat, and any misbehaviour in his tavern would see him come out from behind his bar with a massive quarterstaff to lambast the culprits within an inch of their lives. Freya respected him and liked him too, him and his equally roly-poly family. "Rotgut or no, it will taste like ambrosia to me," Freya said, wiping at her dusty face with a muscled and scarred hand. "My throat is so dry that desert scorpions have been trying to nest in it." "If you catch them, I can put them into my potato spirit barrel to give the spirits an extra kick," Peros said, handing her a large tankard of dark ale, which she immediately raised and drank half of in one long swallow. "Better," she said. "Peros, where is the wizard Tagorli? Is he staying here?" "Yes," said Peros, "but he's not here very much. He's out in the forest west of the Green Forest. Him and his band of mad wizards. The Mages of Sin, they call themselves. The Sin bit stands for sorcerers idolising nature. Or is it sorcerers interceding for nature? Sorcerers inseminating nature? Something like that, anyway." "Ha, Peros chuckled. "At any rate, it means running around the woods and trying to stop loggers. But they'll have little chance of that if the elders of this town have any say in it. Logging has given the town riches, they argue, and riches are what matters." "Do you think that too?" Freya asked curiously. It didn't surprise her that Tig would intercede for trees, or that the people of Fulcrum might fancy gold over green, but it did surprise her that the Green Foresters would allow too much logging too near the borders of their forest. Peros shrugged. "I think that coin is good for business, but I want my grandchildren, when it is the turn of one of that generation to be called Peros the Stout, to have a town to live in and coin to spend as well. Short-sighted is what I call it, to log out all the forest and leave behind nothing." He shrugged his massive shoulders again. "So I wish your wizard friends good luck and hope that they succeed. Have you come to join them?" "I know not why he called me," Freya said, "but I came to his call. I will find out soon enough what he wants. He'll be back by sundown, unless the loggers try to cut wood by night. Then he'll stay out there. You'll never find him. Best to stay here and wait. I have a good roast of mutton out the back, and soup or stew." "Mutton," Freya said, "and soup, and bread, and more ale, and a room and stabling for my horse." "The same horse as last time?" Peros asked hopefully. He had made good money from Freya's unusual horse's hatred of stable hands and curious love of children by farming out one of his own sons as keeper at a very high price. Once a bandit of fearsome reputation, now made a horse by the hand of a benevolent or perhaps especially cruel wizard. Dinner's interest in small children had yet to be explained, but Freya was glad of it. Otherwise, she'd have had to do her own stable handing everywhere she went, since Dinner's strong opinions tended to end badly for others. She went back out now to lead him to the stable that went in behind the tavern. Unsaddling him herself, she took a little time to groom him as he pulled at the sweet hay in the manger, her own hairbrush and her nimble fingers picking out the pixie knots and rubbing away the sweat marks. "You did well, my horse," she told the irascible being who was her mount and who loved her with all of his black heart. "You travel as swiftly and smoothly as the wind, O best of horses," she went on, hugging his lean head to her and kissing his velvety nose, the only part of him that was in any way soft. He snorted and tossed his head as if to say, "Be off with you, you fussing woman." But she knew him well, and she knew that the light that bloomed there in his dark eye at her praise, and he didn't even try a little bit to bite her face off. Dinner was a sucker for a snow job. Pyrrhos the younger arrived at that point. A small boy of perhaps 5, as round as he was tall. He loved all horses, and he loved this horse especially, and had brought dinner a warm mash full of apples and bran. Apples being dinner's favourite, praise from Freya became unimportant in truth. She left him slobbering over his food blissfully while the tiny boy dragged over a half barrel to stand on so that he was tall enough to continue dinner's rubdown. Saddlebags slung casually over her shoulder, Freya came back into the common room, and Pyrrhos the Stout waved her over and pointed to a space on one bench where more ale, soup and mutton were laid out for her, with a whole loaf of new bread ready to tear open. Freya slung one long leg over the other over the bench and sat down, but had not even begun to eat yet when a sense of someone right behind her and too focused on her made her tense her fists ready to fight. Just as she began to turn, a rasping voice right behind her ear made her finish that turn in delighted anticipation. "Freya First Rider, fancy meeting you here again," it grumbled. There you go. First instalment. I hope you enjoyed it.